In short, no, I don't think it'll have much of an effect. It didn't really seem like a particularly thought out plan from President Trump. So, mentioned in his first day in office, he talked about sanctions, but that was in response to a question from a journalist. And then the follow up on social media about taxes and tariffs. There's really not a lot of trade now between Russia and the US. There's some stuff in platinum and phosphates, but there's not enough for taxes and tariffs to have any impact on Russia. In terms of sanctions, the US already has over 500 sanctions on Russia. The latest round, the Biden administration early January put sanctions on the Russia's Shadow Fleet, which is the ships that have been shipping oil around the world, supporting Russia's economy in breach of the US sanctions. That was kind of the last gap. So it's unlikely that any new regime of sanctions or these taxes and tariffs will have any impact on bringing Russia to the table. That said, it is pretty clear from some of the messaging from Vladimir Putin that he is keen to negotiate. Now, how far that goes, it's not clear. The war is very much having an impact on Russia. There's estimates that they've spent about 10% of GDP in 2024 on the conflict. Economic growth has slowed. So there is a lot of incentive for Putin to come to the table, but Trump's latest threats are not part of those incentives.
Yeah, so when you say Vladimir Putin has suggested that he is in a mood to possibly negotiate, you don't think that has anything to do with the fact that Donald Trump is now US president?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think Putin would like it to be perceived in that way, that both tried to kind of play up their close relationship. But in fact, 6 months ago, Putin did put on the table a plan for a ceasefire. It's not a very acceptable plan for many. He talked about the fact that Ukraine would have to give up the four provinces that Russia said that they have annexed in 2022. Now, Russia hasn't gained control of those four provinces. They have about 20% of Ukraine at the moment. They also said that Ukraine would have to undertake to never join NATO, which is something that Ukraine is highly unlikely to do. So those conditions that Putin outlaid about 6 months ago are unlikely to be met. So it is clear that there is room for negotiation, but exactly what those ceasefire talks could look like, it's not entirely clear.
Yeah, if there are those key sticking points, is there really any hope that there's going to be an end to this soon?
Look, soon, absolutely not. I think Trump's statements in the lead up to the election that this would be solved within one day were thought of as laughable at that time. Often, they've now proven to be incorrect. Trump's recently appointed envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, a former general in the US Armed Services, he's kind of said it's probably a 100-day plan. Now, he hasn't laid out what that 100-day plan looks like, but that is probably more realistic. What are some of the options? Look, I think that Ukraine is coming around to the fact that they are probably likely to have to at least agree to freeze the front line where it is. They're going to have to give up some territory, at least temporarily. And we saw earlier this week Zelensky at the World Economic Forum talk about the idea of peacekeepers in Ukraine. He said it would probably need about 200,000, and that would need to include United States forces to be a deterrent to Russia. So I think he's coming around to the fact that the lines are probably going to have to freeze somewhere near where they are. So
Yeah.
we're seeing some of the things of what it might look like, but the whole plan isn't clear. And I don't think the US really have a plan at the moment.
Yeah, and you mentioned before that Russia currently has about 20%, I think, of Ukraine. You think as part of this settlement, Russia will probably keep that?
Look, I think that what we might see is that positions might freeze in place in some ways similar to what we've seen during the Korean War some 70 years ago on the Korean Peninsula. We might see them freeze in place and try to solve that problem in the future because it's unlikely to be solved at this point.
But what are the implications then for the global international law and the global order if the world is going to stand by and allow countries to invade other countries and take territory?
Look, this is one of the big challenges. So the Russia-Ukraine war has really reached a stalemate at the moment, a significant loss of life on both sides, and it really does need to be resolved at some point. The challenge, though, is Russia has illegally invaded Ukraine. They have flagrantly, undermined the UN Charter. They have breached the UN Charter. And we are seeing a trend globally of states resorting to the use of force to prove a point. We saw that with Iran's missile attacks on Israel last year, both in April and I think in October. And it's sending a message. It certainly sends a message in our reason to China about how the international world reacts to a country illegally invading another country. And certainly China will be watching to see what happens as a result of this war and whether Russia actually manages to maintain some of Ukraine's territory, which looks likely at this stage.